are going to give it like a minute or two as some parents, hopefully who are dropping their kids off at some programming, are headed our way. And in the meantime, we'll just hang out and get to know one another. Thank you all so much for coming out on this really beautiful Saturday. Appreciate you being here and seeing you here. You should have gotten some note cards on your way in from our amazing ushers and greeters. Yep, there's Matt Richards. And so if you have questions, and actually based upon the size of this group, which I'm feeling, we could just even do questions as they come up. And so no need for the formality as well. We like our questions with curiosity, asked with curiosity, and telling us a little bit of your story as well. But we also want to honor the schedule that we have with some of our amazing programming. So we're going to give it, like I said, another minute, and then we will get started. And I believe Devin has alerted our folks who are joining us on our live stream. Some of our local folks are joining us on live stream, and then we also have our wonderful community in Dallas. Well, it's 8 in Dallas.
Where's the camera? Who should we wave to? Where should we wave?
I know. So we got a camera there. We got a camera there.
Is it on the live stream?
Yeah, the live stream is on, and it's going
everywhere.
to the First Pres, Dallas YouTube right now. So you can just look at any of the cameras and say hi to your peeps.
Okay. You want me to do that right now?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Hello.
Say hi to your people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say it to all the cameras. Hey, Dallas.
Yeah. What's been our tradition with these conversations is we don't waste a lot of time with bios. The list of where you went to school.
Google us.
Yeah, Google. Yeah, exactly. And we
Google
had
stalk
those
us.
slides going before, which had all of the pertinent information. But what's going to come out in the course of this conversation is really the stories and the experiences. So I'm going to get things started. So welcome to our first ever. I was just sharing this with Beth Streeter. The craziness of having a live This Is Crucial conversation. A conversation that was started only because we had these virtual options available to us. And so the fact that we are in person feels very special and awkward and weird too, right? Like, how do we angle chairs when we don't have gallery view on a Zoom?
What should I wear?
What should I wear on the lower half of my body? It's
Where
so
was my
weird.
hair and makeup team 3 hours ago?
Yes,
Charlene?
exactly. When you don't have the touch-up function or the light function. And so we're just getting used to being in person again. So today's topic of the conversation is talking about the future of faith. And I want to say very much up front that our aim in this conversation is to not provide certainty or answers. But this is just a really vulnerable and frank conversation between 4 people who are in the thick of faith work. And I will say selfishly, it's 3 people that this conversation would have happened at a table probably with wine somewhere out in Berkeley or Oakland or Richmond or whatever. And so this is a conversation I want to be having any night of the week with these 3 amazing individuals. And so I'm just so glad that you all get to be a part of it, that we get to hear your voices and your questions as well. And so it is with joy that I get to introduce my co-host, who's here in Berkeley. I know. The Reverend Amos Disasa. Someone came up to you just a little while ago, and they said, I believe the word was Twitter-pated.
What?
Right? Beth?
Twitter-pated.
Twitter-pated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like meeting a celebrity.
Oh. I'm just here.
You are, and we're glad that you're here.
Yeah, my journey has brought me here to Berkeley, and it's a journey that I have been waiting for a long time. So it's good finally to meet all these people that I have exchanged emails with and been in Zooms with, and received your reflections about past This Is Crucials and your ideas as well about future This Is Crucials. And so, yeah. It's, everybody looks taller than they do on Zoom, by the way. So.
Everybody?
Everybody. Even, yeah.
So special welcome also to hopefully members of the First Church of Berkeley community who are here. And yay, we've got some First Church and members of the Pacific School of Religion community who might be here joining us online. Our guests, just the president and the lead pastor of those communities that just happen to be here. So we thank you for lending your bigwigs to us.
Great to be with you.
Yeah. All right.
And it's good to be back at First Pres.
Yay, always. We'd love to have you here, David.
I'll start with a question that I've been asking a lot of people recently, and that question is, how are you sleeping? And when you do wake up in the middle of the night, what are you thinking about these days? Molly.
Calling on me, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I call my midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. awake time my alone time with God. So I try not to be too stressed about it. I feel like that's the time when God can really get through because the world is quiet. But when I'm worried, the worries I usually bring to God are first kind of somewhat petty stuff like, are people going to come back to church, physically in person? And what can I do to attract them back to church rather than compel them back to church? Because we know how compulsion and religion go. We've done it for 2,000 years. It doesn't work so well. We want to attract people back. But really, and then God sort of answers back, is that really the question you want to ask me? And really, the question I want to ask God is not about building up the institution or how do I maintain or steward this institution, because I don't actually feel that is what God is calling me to do. That may be what my congregation wants because it's comforting and it's comfortable. Our church burned down 5.5 years ago. You can see it across the street. We're just finally taking down the burned part, and y'all, First Pres, took us in for 3 weeks. Right after that fire, thank you and bless you for that until we found a new church home. And since that moment, the whole question of the institutional church has been on all of our minds. And of course, the pandemic brought that to the fore for those of us whose churches hadn't literally burned down yet. So that's what keeps me up at night. What's next? And how am I called to be part of it? How am I called to be true to that calling, which is really not just about maintaining or building an institution, but calling people into the mystery, the wonder, the joy of the life of faith? What form is that going to take? How can I not miss it because I'm so busy going to committee meetings or working on budgets?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Molly.
You bet.
Yeah. David.
Well, I'm sleeping pretty well, but like many people, I take sleeping pills.
Okay.
And I think
That's real.
I've been really aware of that. It happened once I moved here. And recognize that, things are getting heavy. And I'll go to bed with a lot of things in my mind, and I wake up with a lot of things in my mind. So I'm grateful for trazodone. It's helpful. I also recognize, though, that a couple years ago, I would wake up and my heartbeat was really high. Ended up going to the doctor and figured out what's going on. The doctor said, you're just stressed. Too many things. So now I'm sleeping, I wake up, and my heart is not beating as fast. I feel like I'm much more grounded and understand a little bit better that these last couple of years have pressed us hugely, but some things are becoming a little clearer, or at least I've come to realize I don't control a lot of them.
Yes.
I was here at First Pres and at First in Berkeley, preached as well, and at both places I referred to this poem by Wendell Berry, "When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's life might be." So there's a lot of heaviness, yet the sense of wrestling with that and finding that peace in the middle of the night has been really meaningful. To be able to ground myself in community, in folks, the conversations that I'm fortunate to have all these folks as folks that have been in these conversations to think about the work that we are doing. Institutionally, for me, I think I've come to realize for Pacific School of Religion is one of many seminaries in the United States, coming to clarity about what it is that we are to do in the world, and to be very focused on that work, and to begin to sense that, well, there's a lot of questions, we are doing something about it. So being able to respond, to do what is ours to do, and to entrust the rest of it to God is helping, including for my children. I'm sleeping better too because my youngest graduates this Thursday, and they made it through high school and are doing great.
Yes, we can definitely clap for that. We're going to get back to the question of to do what is ours to do. I think that is the question that we should be asking, as opposed to like, where is our next guarantee? But to answer your question, Amos, I feel like I'm either crashing, like I'm so exhausted with it all at the end of the night, or my mind and brain is just like worrying, WHIRRING and WORRYING. And a lot of the questions, Molly, that you pose, so I think it starts out as a processing of probably the flurry of emails that I got towards the last hours of the day that I shouldn't have checked.
Yes.
But I did. Don't know why I did that.
I call it death by email.
Yeah, and I mean, no good emails are sent at that hour, and no good emails are read at that hour. And so I really should know better, but I still read them. And so then I go through my own kind of just self-criticalness, but then it leads to that holy questioning of, okay, so wait, what are we doing? And what's underneath the anxiety? And what are we trying to do as this church, First Presbyterian Church of Berkeley? What are we trying to do as the church? And I mean, that's how actually the conversation title changed. It was started out as the future of the church. And let's think bigger. I actually think the question at large is around faith in general. Yeah. And so going through those questions in my head, and then asking the very scary question, Molly, that you ask is, what's my role in this? Do I have a role in this? And so it usually ends up with me kind of just falling asleep in the midst of the question asking. It's rarely falling asleep in the midst of getting an answer. It's just in the perpetual relentlessness of even more questions. But I do find that the questions get better. They start out pretty cheap and surface level, and then they become more authentic, I think, to the things that my heart really is worried about, and what I think God wants me to be focused on.
And maybe that's the gift from God, that you fall asleep before the answers, because often God can work on us best in our subconscious, right? Through dream work, look at the Bible. Like, that is how God is able to access the protagonists of the Bible when they're like least defended in sleep.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. That'll preach. Amos, how are you sleeping?
I asked the question. I didn't know y'all were actually asking me.
I think he has to answer.
Turnabout.
Yeah.
I'm sleeping well. I don't know if that's just from being tired. I think that has something to do with it. I'm just more tired than I used to be at night as I go to sleep. But when I do wake up, I am thinking about preaching. That's what I'm thinking about. I wake up and I'm wondering, what does God have to say like this week, So is there a worthy proclamation to meet for this setting and this context of this week? Preaching has been very challenging, I think, the last couple of years, and it always brings me joy to be able to preach, but getting there has just been so hard,
What makes it hard?
Well, it seems as if every other Sunday, for one, there is an event, an episode. There was also COVID and the pandemic that was so unusual and mysterious in so many ways, and it was hard to find language from Scripture that would attend to all of it. It also just feels as if there's an urgency to preaching these days. I don't know if I'm putting it on myself or if it's something that
No, you're right.
is just there. Yeah, as
Yeah.
if like, oh my goodness, like some change somehow, and this might be my own pride, but like somebody's depending on me
Yeah.
proclaiming something of value this Sunday. Like there's no Sundays where you can just phone it in. Not that I ever do that, but try not to. But
Yeah.
That's where it's helpful to be, in a tradition that does communion every Sunday. I'm ordained in a Lutheran tradition, because then if you really screw up on teaching and preaching, at least there's communion.
Yeah. I would carry it.
and I also sense people are just paying attention.
And that's a problem. They're finally paying attention to our sermons. It only took a pandemic.
They're paying attention.
Yeah.
They are. They're eager to hear sometimes like good comforting news, and they're also, I think, sometimes eager to hear a challenging word that is discomforting.
Yeah.
And because of the pandemic and our distance from each other, it is harder as a preacher to actually figure out where people are.
Right. Because you're not getting feedback. You're not
Yes.
getting visual feedback and nonverbals or auditory feedback from people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely do not miss preaching to my phone
Oh gosh, that was painful.
during all virtual church. Like, there's nothing. I got nothing. I'm getting nothing here. Or, like, I'm trying to track the chat, and, like, my brain is just going completely haywire because I have no executive functioning anymore.
And so we have people sitting in front of us, right? So this is to be able to
Thank
see
you,
your
people.
eyes. Thank you for being here. Shout out, what's keeping you up at night? What's one word? Let's do it.
Fear of getting COVID.
Okay, yes, fear of getting sick, fear of getting COVID. What else? What is keeping you up at night? Work. Sorry, say that again? Work stress. Loneliness. Thanks for saying that. Gosh, I struggle with that. What else? Yeah, Randy.
Trying to catch up with tasks that have been undone for 3 or 4 years.
Catching up with that life that went on pause. Absolutely. What else? Grief.
Grief.
Yep.
Politics.
Politics. What?
Hey.
Really?
Yeah.
Right. Politics, yep. Anything else? Let's hear one more.
I was going to say the wheels coming off the bus of democracy, but my husband was much more prudent
Instead
and
of
just said
politics.
politics.
Okay.
Racial terrorism.
Racial terrorism.
I think in the quiet, sounds seem louder.
She said, in the quiet, sounds seem louder, which anxiety, yes. The quiet, which is a blessing and a curse in that. The silence can be deafening. So it's interesting, we're talking about how in COVID, one of the things that I heard, some of the weird outcomes of that time is that people were having really weird dreams. That dentists were saying that people, grinding was at its like all-time worst, right? I see some nodding. That dentists were just seeing patients coming in. So one of the first appointments that I had in California was with my dentist, and I had just really bad tooth pain. And this dentist was really strange. He spent an hour talking to me. I think he looked at my teeth for like 20 seconds. And he spent the whole time saying, "Are you stressed?" He said, oh, no, you know what he said? He said, "Do you have a stressful job?"
Nah.
I was like, well, and he said, "So I think that the reason your tooth hurts is because you're not breathing enough, you're stressed, which means you're grinding your teeth, and that's why you have sensitivity." And he spent the hour of his time talking to me about like massaging my face and just breathing, which was like such a gift that he wasn't like, "Okay, let's just do a root canal and then let's get this over with." He was like, there's like something that's a root to the problem, to the stress, to the grinding, to the pain, which I appreciated. And so we're seeing that. That was the moment, COVID in the silence of the slowing down and that great pause surfaced a lot. The silence was deafening what emerged in that. And so one of the things that emerged was this concept of the great resignation, right? We were just seeing certain industries, all industries, but definitely certain industries, just seeing employees leaving en masse. So we're talking about schools, teachers, educators, administrators, principals leaving en masse. I mean, we're still seeing this, but not so acutely in the beginning of COVID, but in the medical field, right? Just nurses, doctors, administrators leaving en masse. Airline travel, right? You have flight attendants who are like, I am not dealing with these people anymore, leaving en masse. And now one of the big statistics is clergy.
Yep.
Leaving en masse, right? And so we play all of these things out. Let's say we know the immediate hurt of these things when our kids don't have teachers. I was talking to someone who said, my kid hasn't had a math teacher yet this year, and it's April. And all of these various things, the ripple effect. And so everyone's asking the question, why are you leaving ministry, or why are you thinking of leaving ministry? When I do think that actually the more important question is, why are you staying? Right? What did God call you to that is compelling enough to stay, even when it does get really challenging? Because I know that we're, in looking out here, that we're all in very challenging industries, that we often ask ourselves the question, why are we staying? So that's my question to you all. Why are you staying? What's in this line of work, this faith-based work that is?
Can I add one?
Yeah.
I think you actually told me the statistic.
Yes.
Which was at the end of April, the Barna Group conducted a study and found that 42% of clergy are considering leaving the ministry. This was in April of just this year.
Almost 1 in 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
So why are we sticking around? Well, I would say disciples came to Jesus and said, Lord, to whom shall we go?
Yeah.
You have the words of eternal life. So it's a funny text, right? Because it's like, well, and no better show in town, so we're sticking with you. As Jesus turns to the disciples after a lot of people had already left, pretty much disappointed. And so Jesus turns to the last 12 that are left and asks, why are you still around? Do you want to go? But, so to me, I think it is about saying this is crucial. This is the places and the work that gives meaning to both my life, but also to the work that lies ahead for us to do. Yeah. I've shared this a couple times in some of our conversations, but a number of years ago, I went on this retreat for, people who were being shepherded into leadership of educational institutions, and they put us out in the woods for a while, and they gave us an assignment to come up with a mission for our lives that was 10 words. I hate those assignments, but I had to do it, and I'm glad I did because they have stayed with me. So the 10 words I came up with that I feel called to be a prophet, to set an ever-widening table, and to resist fear. That's my sense of my own calling, and to me, that's the definition of what it means to be a pastor, which while I'm a president of a seminary, I see my job as being a pastor in that understanding, to be a space to be prophetic. So I stay in the place I'm in because I think that is a space where I can be prophetic in the sense of providing not just critique, but a viable alternative vision. What can we give a try? What can we name both of critique and calling out what is, but also dare in this crazy idea? Tomorrow we are going to award a bunch of graduates a Masters of Divinity. Right. I mean, you gotta do this tongue in cheek. Like, seriously? You're gonna be a Master of the Divinity? Yeah. We all hold one of those. So this is a good place to be prophetic, to set an ever-widening table. Who's not at the tables that we set? What opportunities do we have in leadership, hard as it is, to set a wider table? And heck, resisting fear. Because I think this fear that keeps us up, that dominates our politics, that grinds our teeth, that creates our fear, that's the core of the gospel. Do not be afraid. Mm-hmm. So being in a role and in a position and within a community that, not always, but by and large supports those three things. I'm grateful.
Yeah.
I'll go. My own semi-joke answer, semi-truthful, is that it's the only thing I know how to do. So, but my more truthful answer is that I'm a church nerd. I love it. I was raised in church. Church saved my life when I was really young. Church camp continued to save my life. I get to have a front row seat to human transformation, and that is really exceptional. That's how I get paid, honestly, is when I see people grow, heal from trauma, grow through difficult times, find joy after trauma. I like to say God doesn't send the disaster, but God will use it. When I see people really living into that theology, that's a big part of it. And then collectively, again, the prophetic, what we're able to do when we're together, and when we're together intergenerationally, all ages, because church is one of the, a lot of our churches are aging. We're not seeing young people come, but some of our churches, all of our churches usually have at least one lone, like that weird teenager who is a church nerd, who keeps showing up, and adults who love them and support them and are there to provide a strong container. I rail against budgets and committees and the structures of the church when they weigh us down or slow us down, but the fact is, it's really helpful to have a building. It's really helpful to have a staff. It's really helpful to have a little money to organize our life together. I'm all for grassroots movements. I'm all for the spontaneous movement of the Spirit, and I don't think God only lives in churches. Certainly, I've seen God in the street a lot, just walking down the street and also in the streets with some of the mass protests of the last few years. That's where I feel really alive and like my faith is really alive. But to be honest, our church, that can happen, but then it dissipates. And the church can be a great organizing principle for sustaining those efforts. One of my peak life moments, particularly in the last 6 years, the 6 years I've been at First Church Berkeley UCC, was 2 weeks after Charlottesville, when Heather Heyer was killed, and that was such a seminal moment where peaceful protesters in the street and someone can just drive over them, just drive into them and drive over them. And if that's not terrorism, what is? And we knew the Proud Boys were coming to Berkeley. And it was a very intentional move on their part. If they can infiltrate Berkeley, if they can incite their terror in Berkeley, they have pierced our heart. They have pierced our liberal hearts, yeah? So what were we going to do? We were afraid for our lives. Some of us, we have a contingent of folks in the church who are hardcore, I would say, activists, Democratic Socialists of America. They brought me on board. I pay my dues to the DSA now. And then we have older folks who lived through the 60s and never took to the streets. But we knew we had to do something, and the Spirit caught us, and we invited churches from all over the East Bay to come and practice singing. Our music director, together with some other folks, formed a choir, a pop-up choir called the Choral Majority. We sang. We had about 500 or 600 people in our sanctuary. We had our soup makers made homemade soup. We had people who weren't ready to be on the front lines taking coats, sort of hat check, keeping people's backpacks because we couldn't travel downtown wearing anything. We sang, we prayed, we found our courage as an all-faiths group, and we marched down there together, and we outnumbered the Proud Boys. I think there ended up being 30 of them, and there were something like 4,000 of us that day.
Wow.
And the day ended without any violence. Well, I shouldn't say that. There were a couple fist fights, but no real blood drawn, no real injuries, and they haven't come back. Can we praise that? Can we say amen to that? The Proud Boys have not been back in downtown Berkeley since August 2017. And that's the power of church. That's the power of collective action sustained by deep stories and deep relationships and sacred texts that remind us that our ancestors have been through this and so much worse, and it's our turn to show up with courage, and we will have each other's back, and there's a role for everyone. We don't all have to be, down there marching and chanting. Some of us need to stay back to put out the chocolate for when the protesters come back, because when you face the dementors, that's how you calm down. That's how you re-regulate your central nervous system. So church can be frustrating. It can break your heart when we fight over petty things, when we get stuck in administrivia, but it's still the locus of so much hope and change and human transformation. And leadership development for our kids and youth and lots of people.
Amen.
I'm having fun.
Good.
It
I'm so
shows.
glad.
Not
yeah.
tonight. That's why I am
Okay,
having fun
okay,
tonight.
Oh, you're not having fun
No, I
tonight.
am also tonight. Also, yeah. I am a professional communicator. I promise. Yeah. No, I'm having fun. I am. That's why it's just as I said earlier. People are paying attention. People are at least what I'm witnessing in my context is people are receptive and they're open to new possibilities in a way that they have not been in my previous 16, 17 years of ministry. I've never seen it in church before, where people are as willing to try new things as they are right now. And I mean, our setting is pretty. You would think it's pretty formal, and our structures are formal. Our church is built with a corporate kind of model. It's prototypical tall steeple Presbyterian church, but since COVID started, I have sensed a relaxed nature and posture to everything that we're doing. People are just okay. Yeah, you got the hymn number wrong in the bulletin. Yeah. I'm good. It's all right. You don't have to reprint the whole bulletins, this week. Or, and that's apparent in so many different ways. And so, in moments like this, I think my nature is one that actually enjoys sort of an open landscape and being as a part of a group that's operating in the frontier as opposed to back home. So yeah, I'm having fun. I wouldn't say. Yes, I'll just stop talking at this point and just, leave it at that.
Quit while you're ahead.
Which is, I think this might be the first time I've said that out loud.
Yeah, I've never heard you say that before in my life.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I feel like clergy are really having fun with this statistic, the 42%. We feel real seen by it. We're like, yeah, the statistics
So watch
don't.
out, y'all.
Yeah.
You better be nice, or else.
And so we have that conversation, but I have to say I'm just really, I don't know if it's encouraged or concerned that other people are also deeply invested in this conversation right now. Thank you for being here in this. And so my human answer to this question is, it isn't what got me into ministry, but it's why I'm staying. It's my kids. So I have 2 young girls. And so I think of a future in which they don't have church. And so I'm not talking about they don't get to tell their friends that they go to this church or whatever, but all the things that come with church, the good, bad, and the ugly, but most importantly, all the things that I think we took for granted for so long, the intergenerational community, us saying that your family, even if I'm not related to you, and that I love you even if I don't always like you. Yeah. All of these things in our world right now are not natural or given. And maybe they probably weren't, a lot of them weren't ever natural. And so very acutely for me, it is the story. The story of our faith tradition, of a God who loved us so much that God would take on the experience of humanity, which for all of us, we're like, oh, why? It's not, this is the struggle. And to be in that mess, not just beside us or above us, but really with us. And so I kind of think of, if that is the truth that I get to tell my children, but then have it be embodied in community, then they're going to be okay in the biggest sense of that word. I mean, I think the other thing for me is we actually just had a memorial in this space a few hours before this, and one of the big things, I mean, it was this amazing individual who did so much for pediatric medicine in the field of HIV or with the HIV epidemic and even pneumonia and all of these things, and yet the stories that were told at this memorial was how this individual was such an amazing father and a grandfather, and how close he cared about his patients, his family, members of his community, in that whenever he interacted with them, they really felt like they were the only person in the room. And so they talked about how he really showed the value of the individual. That was like his guiding principle, was the value of every individual. But let's keep it local because the individual matters, which is actually the antidote to individualism, ironically.
Yeah.
Right? That I am the only thing that matters. I should matter more than you. I should put my needs above yours. And my future is more important than yours. My needs are more important than yours. And we come into this space, which that's a hard tension for me actually to deal with, to say, you as an individual matter so much to God, so much to the creator of the universe. And take that knowledge and now care about everyone else. That makes no logical sense. And that's exactly how I want my children to operate in the world. Yeah. And so I mean, look, if this is not gonna be my industry 10 years from now, that's fine. But if my children 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now do not have a community of faith that they can come to and be flawed and human and imperfect and humble and courageous and powerful and beautiful and inspiring, that to me, that is where my heart breaks. And so in the midst of the deafening silence, I'm fighting for the church that y'all have painted, the life of faith that y'all have painted. All right, so let's talk about our kids.
Okay.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Let's go there.
Yes.
They're not here, so that's good.
Yeah.
But they'll know.
They'll know.
So can I confess that I'm looking at my mom, and she texted me before this, and she said, "Are your kids coming tonight?" And I said, "No, they didn't want to come." Like, I will admit, I'm the pastor, and my kids were like, "We don't want to come." And they struggle, so it's a battle on Sunday morning, one that I don't have to fight because I get here early enough, where I leave that to my partner at home. And yet my daughter has been requesting, can we read the Bible at night? And so we are now ministering and having conversations in and around Generation Z, which is the least religious generation in history. The next generation is going to eclipse that one, and the one after that. I mean, that's the trend, right? And yet, they're also the most hopeful generation about social change and transformational community, and regularly talk about Jesus Christ. So 1 in 3 teenagers globally, and I'm not just talking about the United States, believe that Jesus is active in the world. Okay, so we're holding a lot of these things in tension, right? So religious does not mean faithless. Non-religious does not mean faithless, right? And so what is it like parenting kids and youth in 2022? Ones that you hope will be, people of faith.
I mean, I guess I should go because I wrote a book about this. It's called Bless This Mess. I always forget the subtitle. What is it? Chaotic parenting in an age of chaos, spiritual parenting in an age of chaos, something like that. And the principle of the book was based on a proverb from the book of Proverbs. It's often misinterpreted. Raise the child in their own way, and when old they will not stray. Or raise a child in the right way, and when they're old they will not stray. And what the text actually says is raise the child in their own way. God created every child with their own way, and it's our job to understand who they are and support them into becoming, right? Not to make them little Christians or make them mini-me's or live out our, unmet ambitions or anything like that. It's really just to witness, learn, support, protect, put up healthy boundaries, but then release, set free, because God has a dream for them. God doesn't have a plan for them, but God has a dream for them. That's really hard when your child is doing things that are risky or dangerous, or when they absolutely humiliate you during the children's time. My son, we have two kids, one's 16, one's 20, younger girl, older boy. My son had a full year when it was he thought it was his job to best me during the children's sermon, like a gotcha moment, How do you, he was trying to find himself, and I didn't want to then shame him back because he's the more powerless person in this relationship, even though I wanted to. So how are we working ourselves out of a job? How are we helping our children become? I'm grateful because both my children still like church. The 20-year-old doesn't always go. He was working weekends actually for a long time, overnights at FedEx, and that was his priority. He's not, I don't know that he'd call himself a Christian. Our 16-year-old daughter does. She is that church nerd. That is who she is. She didn't just get that from me, and she's, never misses church. She's on the search committee for our new pastor. She does scripture skits. She's in it. She runs the slides on Sundays. Our son needed to push more. He needed to push back more. I told him till he was 14, you go to church because we go to church. That's something we do as a family. And of course, because he's the person, he's like, well, we're not there as a family because you're up there and Carmen's over there and Dad's over, we're all separate. And I was like, okay, well, we're sort of there together and it's important to us. When you're 14, you can start to choose for yourself, although we hope you'll come once a month. And we moved here when he was 14, and those were some very hard years for him. The move was very hard on him. He was really unsafe for a long time, and parenting him was a very scary enterprise. But there were about 3 or 4 older women at church who loved him, who looked for him, who had deep, genuine conversations with him whenever he saw them, because he's not a small talk guy, he's a deep talk guy, who wrote him cards and letters. He went away to school for a year. They would text him. They were God for him. And when we were so scared and felt so out of control, they were just this steady presence. And whether or not he comes back to church later in life, I know that's in his soul. And when push comes to shove, he prays. When he's on hard times, he prays. We always prayed as a family at night, every night. He's a kid who had a lot of fears at night when he was younger, and that spiritual practice is still in him.
Ooh, everybody's looking at me. So we have kids the same age, 16 and 20, camp together often, so the kids have kind of I moved here 7 years ago. Molly and her family moved here 6 years ago. So we've spent the last several years raising kids together and watching them thrive and
not
struggle
thrive.
and not thrive and, ship them off to each other whenever we were all cooped up in one room. We committed as a dinner group. We continue to meet every month to just come back together in spite of whatever the pandemic was doing, outdoors with masks, whatever it was, just so that we could have community, because what's the saying? It takes a village. So for my kids, they've been a joy. I mean, I am so grateful most of the time. There's been a few rough patches as well, especially when we were, right at the time, for many of us who have kids who are teens, at the time when they have to self-differentiate. We're all stuck in one house together, right next to each other, trying to make sure you're up in time for school and heading out and keeping it quiet and doing everything. So those things were intense, but that were, I'm just really grateful. So my son just finished his first year of college at Howard University, just came back from that, and my youngest, Meheret, will graduate from St. Mary's High School here in Berkeley on Thursday, so they're heading off to college in the fall. So it's weird to be at that point of, preparing to be empty nesters. First thing my wife and I did is we got season passes to go skiing. So we're ready for when they're out. But throughout our lives, dinner every night has been key. Prayers at night. Our kids are originally from Ethiopia, so we've had a lot of village to raise them with. We partner with their biological family at a distance in very limited ways because of the, to be able to ensure that they have a sense of identity of themselves, of who they are and what they're becoming. But then also the extended families. My family's in Guatemala, my wife's family's in Minnesota and in Finland. So the kids have grown up with a real sense of a global world and have been very deep in their understanding of the world and of themselves. Have taught me a lot. I mean, they were very active over the last several years around issues of race and politics. So I'm really grateful for them. It's been fun to raise them, even in the challenges of it. I think when I think about all the things I've learned from them, two things. One is my son's atheism has been really important. I've been in higher education most of my adult life. And so you always go through this period in which you will reject most of the things you grew up with, and that's essential. And what I mean by, my son's atheism is that he has, at different times, identify and saying that, refer to himself as atheist, but primarily understanding that as saying there is a God that must be rejected, right? And the A that he is against, the God he is against, is a God that he sees often embraced by most of the church, that is segregated, that is, really disconnected from people's daily lives and commitments, that was used to justify slavery. And that is a God that when we have our best conversations, we recognize neither of us believe in. My youngest, Meheret, when Meheret was 6 years old, Meheret said to us, "I'm gender liquid."
Liquid.
And so watching Meheret come to terms with who they are, their own identity, as that evolves, also has been watching how Meheret understands the divine, truly this image that we are created in the image of the divine. So Meheret's own identity and the way they think about themselves and the world helps me to see a much more queer sense of what it means to be God, what it means to be human, and a much more broad understanding, much more inclusive, and much more fluid than the kind of very regimented sense we have of God. So I'm grateful for the way my kids have shaped me.
Thanks for sharing that.
I have a 12 and a 10-year-old, 12-year-old boy, 10-year-old girl, and I forgot the actual question we asked. It's been a while since we returned to that, but I think it was, how are they thinking and talking about faith?
Yeah, how are you, what's it like raising kids right now in faith?
Yeah, they're listening. They don't say much. I mean, they're in church every Sunday, of course, but they're listening closely. They'll bring up sermons from like months ago and remind you of some story you told, right? So they're listening. They're asking questions, but we've been watching Blackish lately. I don't know. It's if you ever want to subcontract your parenting to a TV show, Blackish is a good one. We watch it together, and it's a multiracial family, and issues of race and racial identity are like prevalent in almost every single episode. We're in season 3 right now, and after one of the episodes we've watched over the last month, one of my children asked me the question, "Am I black or am I white?" Because of watching that show. So our family's multiracial as well. My wife is white. She's from West Virginia. I'm from Ethiopia. And in that moment, was not prepared for that question they were asking me. And they could tell in my response. And so we had a conversation, but what I was most worried about was not answering that question for them in the right way or helping them get to whatever the right answer or a answer they could live with. I was actually most concerned with how will this conversation shape their image of God. And it felt profound for that reason more than any other. And so that's what's happening at my house these days. Yeah.
So my kids are 6 and almost 8, so different stage. The questions are not as complicated. They can still be theological and are still largely really around death. If somebody passed away, what happens? In telling stories and reading the Bible. Gender is actually like a pretty big question in our family around God. And but the challenges for me at this stage are that the paradigm itself has shifted so much. And so even the concept, let's say, of a worship service, an hour-long worship service, is a length of time sitting in a room just looking forward for my kids that is not comfortable for them. Even the concept, I'm trying to process them. I was trying to explain to them that back in my day, we used to have to wait for our favorite television show to come on a certain day of the week at a certain time, and then you would sit. Even that concept to them is foreign, right? Because they get to stream, access, get everything they want immediately. And I see this playing out in my daughter's frustration with not being good at something right away, because in her mind, everything is immediate. Mm-hmm. And so even the concepts around that the church, even today, which is built on old concepts of community, and which are beautiful. Some of the things that I actually crave in church, in faith, is tradition. But the traditions were set up in a time where those things made sense. So, for example, I've observed Shabbat in Jerusalem with my Orthodox friend, and I try to imagine, forcing my children to go through that. So no screens, no exchanging of money. We're only going to spend time with each other. You can't cook, everything, all of these things. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds so exhausting, and it would not be rest for me at all, right? And so that is, the container for them has changed. This container hasn't changed, but the way in which they're approaching the world has changed so much. And so and you're hearing this from the person who's a pastor, right? Who believes in these traditions and is going to be a proponent of them. And so I wonder, I'm honestly wrestling through this. And so this is the stuff that I'm struggling with right now, is how to just push against a culture that is basically stands very contradictory to a lot of the things we're trying to do within the church. Yeah. And this is for my children who were born into a world where an iPad was in their hands or an iPhone was in their hands before they could probably speak an entire sentence, right? And so there's not a matter of okay, remember when we used to do that, right? If anything, the time in which we had that was COVID. Was when there were no other options, where we were forced to have family dinners and all of that kind of stuff. And so my family is a dual income. We're hustling to get everywhere. And so all of these things, this sitting down, these traditions, a Shabbat, that kind of thing, feels like a countercultural luxury that I don't even know how to access into at this point with young children. And so these are questions that I hope churches are starting to ask, because it's not just, is your faith important to you? Don't you want to raise your kids in the faith tradition? it's not as simple as answering those questions. There's so many layers to that in terms of how we exist in the world, right? And I mean, I'm constantly aware of the fact that I'm telling my kids to get off their screens when I'm just, incessantly checking my email, right? And so,
They're going to start to take your phone away soon.
oh no, they already do. Yeah. They for sure know my.
Oh, yeah. They're
They'll
great
show me how to
hypocrites.
do things on my own phone.
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
awesome.
miracle.
That's
I love
really
that.
neat. Yeah, I love that.
Well,
Help
I
me
think-
with my iOS update.
No, I do think, that whether it's just forming rituals, creating community, countering some of the worst things about the way we are developing, that in a way faith communities have always striven to do that. I grew up in a Jewish household. My mother always pointed out that the laws about Shabbat do not apply to women of the household, to the mothers, in part because the mothers are the ones making sure everybody else can hang out for a day, right? So it takes somebody's attention, right, to be able to create patterns and to create space. And so I think part of it is, if we think about the church's mission to be able to do that, right, to tend to creating patterns in space in whatever helps. And like you said, different generations and communities have found different things. For the Shabbat in the Orthodox tradition really evolved similar to the early some of the pietistic movements in the Christian tradition in reaction to modernization and to the fact that the industrialization eliminated any sense of pattern. The psalmist says, "Teach us to count our days that we may grow a wise heart." When you're working 24/7, cycles of factories. So it was really a very political move against that, which was very deep within the Jewish community throughout. I mean, think about being enslaved in Egypt, to the extent that that's a historical fact, if it is. Regardless, throughout the history of Judaism, the sense has been that this bizarre things characterizes this group of people, that they think they can take a day off a week. So it's not only a religious practice in itself, but it is an act of formation, right? Like how you actually form yourself. I was driving with my youngest about a month ago, and Mehret said that they were in a conversation with their friends, and the kids in the car, or the other kids said, "Would you raise your children in church?" And Mehret, who's one of the few kids in their friend group that actually goes to church, said, "Yeah, I would. Just because they need some patterns, right? Like, it's not necessarily in the same commitments. I mean, for Mehret, the church has been a place of acceptance, of justice, of all these things. But a lot of it is just creating a sense of belonging and patterns."
Yep.
Yeah.
I have so many disparate thoughts. Let me try to remember at least two of them right now. One is that our young people are in a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
It's really, really bad. There's a beautiful new book that a friend of mine just wrote called Blessed Youth. It's about the mental health crisis and how churches can be responsive to it. It's not all as a result of screens, but a lot of it does track with, it really started in 2007 and 2009 when iPhones became really popular, and there was so much pressure to have a smartphone at a younger and younger age, and it's really hard for parents to set limits around them, and it does make life easier when you're in the car, in traffic, two working parents. So I recommend that book. And as hard as it is to be countercultural, we have to do it. We have to set limits, because our kids cannot set limits for themselves. And most of them are relieved when we do. They probably won't thank us for it, but they're relieved when we can create that space. And we can say, you can skip church once a month, but the other 3, this is just what we're doing. I don't expect you to believe it. I do expect you to be kind when we're there, and hopefully you get something out of it, even if it's just like the good cookies at coffee hour.
Major plus.
Major plus. I think God is not above bribing people sometimes with the good cookies. I said we're not called to make little Christians or make mini-me's, but we are called to create a strong container for our kids, to do that ritual and patterning that we know helps when we're really dysregulated, just to have things be familiar. and to look for ways to invite our young people in, our children, our youth, our young adults, into leadership in the church, into Sunday 10 a.m., all kinds of leadership, to really mentor them into that and tell them that they matter, that we need them, that their gifts are worthwhile, because they're not the future of the church, they're the present of the church, but they're going to disappear if we don't give them something meaningful to do in church. One more thought, it might be gone. Oh well, it'll probably come back around.
Just a quick note. I think it's both sort of that space and self, but it's also the fact that this is, somebody else I mentioned earlier, right? It's much bigger than this. Like a sense, especially when we are so overwhelmed by pandemic, by protests, by polarization, by all these systemic things, to recognize, help kids think there is something much bigger, right? There's a divine, there is a sense of wholeness. Yeah, and it's both. I mean, it's a weird balance between that, whoever had mentioned earlier, right? Like the importance of the particularity of an individual, but the counter of that individualism is the sense that there's a bigger whole.
So the future of faith. I mean, obviously, kids are going to be a huge part of this conversation, though I couldn't agree more. They're not the future of the church. They are the present of the church, are constantly guiding and teaching us in this moment. Yes. This has been a disruptive season for all of us, for our families, for marriages, for loneliness, for mental health, for institutions, for work, all of these things. Just pick anything, and it has been disruptive. And it has also been really generative. Like, This Is Crucial would not exist without the pandemic, for sure. Because I wouldn't have reached out to Amos in Dallas to preach at my church virtually on a Sunday, and that wouldn't, again, we hadn't seen each other for 10 years. I cold emailed him. He said yes. All of a sudden, we realized, we have some pretty similar experiences as people of color leading predominantly white churches. And so how can we support each other in that? And thus, this conversation started. And so looking at this as a moment for us to stop and say, okay, going back to that original thing that you were saying, David, what are we about? What do we exist for? Even to the Sabbath point, if it takes someone's attention is required to create this space, what should our attention be on? Like, shame on us if we just start meeting again and do everything exactly like we did 3 years ago, right? And I'm not just saying pre-COVID, I'm saying pre all of the things that we have been steeped in, and the silence that has been deafening for us.
I'll say something. As someone who serves a majority white church, but not, we have a significant number of people of color, it's incumbent upon people in majority white churches to pay attention to anyone on the margins, anyone with an oppressed status. If you're male, if you're a man, listen to women. If you're cis, listen to trans people. If you're straight, listen to queer people. If you're white, listen to people of color. And listen really carefully and fight for them. And risk something for them. Because that's where God is, at the margins. And that's a truly generative space. And we are in a very scary moment when we have a lot to lose, and people are losing their lives. People who have had oppressed status for a long time, and 50 years of civil rights being rolled, 30 years, 50 years, 300 years, whatever metrics you're using for sort of civil rights and progress, and arrival to the moment we've been wanting for status, for equal status in society. We have a lot to lose. So listen, fight, put something on the line. Body, reputation, power, and move over. Also, if you have, I'm really big in my church about, I think for the first 5 years, if I invited someone to the pulpit who wasn't one of our pastors, it was a person of color. Our moderator right now, which is the senior lay position in our church, is a 29-year-old biracial trans woman. She's there. We chose her because she's gifted and talented, and she's doing a great job, and also because of what it says, because representation matters.
I mean, I'll answer my own question. That's fine. I'm not above that. I'm looking out because I'm seeing some of my our new elders who are going to be serving the church in the coming years. And the conversation we had was around how pre-pandemic we were easily able to fill our days with the programs of the church. So our hours could be filled constantly with learning the Bible and filling our spirits and our minds and stuff that was good. It was transformational, but almost to the point that there wasn't space then to actually go out and live out this transformational work. And so in a very time fashion, I think one of the things that I think the church is grappling with is how do we use the time, our time wisely, and not assume that it's ours to fill with stuff and activities and programming. And even in the time that we do fill, does it have to be programmed? Right? I mean, the few things, and I do think this is related to COVID, but I don't necessarily think it's only going to last in these next COVID times. The things where we've seen people just come out are the things where it's like unscheduled time of gathering and fellowship. Not like, okay, we're going to start the program at 7 o'clock, and from this, we're going to do introductions, and then we're going to do the lecture, and the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and then go home. Right? It was just like come and be in community with one another and develop relationship. And we're going to trust that the Holy Spirit is then going to take that relationship and hopefully between disparate people of disparate experiences and backgrounds and stories, and let the transformational work not happen on our terms and our timeline and our schedule. And so that's something that I'm excited to see. But it is hard when you are trained to look at a church calendar and just start filling it. And that is the measure. I mean, that was what I went to seminary believing, was the measure of success for a pastor or a church, was how busy your church calendar was with as many impressive names as you could get on your docket, and how many people were in the pews on a Sunday. And in a post-COVID world, all of those things are just like,
Yep.
We used to, we say this frequently at the church that I serve is, our charge as leaders is to meet people where they are, and encourage the church to actually meet people where they are. We venerate relevancy right now, and I'm down with it. There are ways in which we speak that as church people, we speak, and especially the institution of church speaks, that makes it very difficult for outsiders to connect with us and feel welcome. And so being relevant is of course, it's important, but at the same time, what I'm wondering now is what is the cost to our weirdness? And our weirdness is really
beautiful.
It's beautiful, and I don't. This is a hunch for me. I don't have any statistics to prove this, but I sense that people want more of the weird and less of the relevant. And I was thinking about that on Easter, especially this year. I was like, this is strange what we do. We're all waking up early, and we've got the brass things, and there's a processional, and there's a big celebration, and everybody's dressed well, and everybody's here, and the tradition seems normal. All that the ornamental parts of Easter, it's very normal now, but the story we're telling is that all of this is about, Jesus of Nazareth, who was dead, and then on this morning, he rose from the dead, and now lives. So let's get the brass out, and let's sing the Easter hymns, and let's proclaim this, and say this is what gives us hope. In this world, that's weird. It's not relevant. It's mysterious and odd, and and to proclaim it it's a form of resistance even in this world at this time.
So I'm guessing you don't have a barista in your lobby.
We have good coffee, yeah, and we even have cookies. But I think that's the challenge now for me and for, that's what I'm sensing is a challenge, is figuring out like how to be relevant and remain weird.
I like that.
Yeah.
We soon will be absorbed into pop culture.
Christianity?
Yes.
Like the Christian church?
Yeah, and if we don't maintain the strangeness of our tradition.
You don't think we already have been absorbed into pop
Yeah, I
culture?
was going to say.
No, as long as we're worshiping on Easter and, then we've still got a chance,
Lots of pastors showing up on TikTok, y'all. It's
But I mean,
cool, though. It's
how
really
many
cool
people
what they're doing
sat
there.
in the pews on Easter Sunday and thought to themselves, this is really weird? I actually crave that. I hope that we are always shocked. It was weird. I think it was weird because we hadn't done it in person for 3 years.
Yeah.
And so that reminded us it was weird. But 3 years ago, it was Easter.
But it doesn't take Easter. I mean, it's open.
We can
Right.
be weird
Open the
all
New
time.
Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Open your Bible to any of the Gospels, and on any page you come to, you'll come across something that is strange to this world.
Yes. Absolutely.
You know,
And
and
odd.
anything we can do to recover some of that weirdness is all good. I had a very interesting day that makes me think about this question. What is it that we should be focusing on? So I went to pick up some stuff for my youngest graduation at this African gift shop in Richmond, and it's in this mall, kind of not a mall, it's like an old beat up shopping center. And so I walked in, and we've got a number of things there, so I was talking with the shop owner, and then when I walked out, there's a little hallway down, and there's barber shop, bunch of other things in there, and in this shopping area. And then 3 of the spaces. In one, there's a worship service going on. In the other one, there's a Bible study. So this is all glass, so when you're walking through, you can see into it. And then there's another one, there's 2 people meeting, looks like some kind of counseling going on, all from Guatemala, where I'm originally from. The women are wearing traditional Guatemalan clothing, and their head is covered with a scarf, and as they're doing Bible study together. And the challenge for me always when I'm in a space like that is, what does Pacific School of Religion do that can serve that community?
Yeah.
What is it that we do? How does our education prepare people and is accessible to where the church is incredibly vibrant and forming? I went from there to get a haircut. Doesn't it look good?
Looks good.
Ernesto, the guy who gave me a haircut, came from Honduras 8 years ago. Didn't speak any English at all. Barely knew anything. Got bullied. Richmond High School. Graduated with a 3.8. Thanks to one person who stuck with him, helped him to make it through. Was so excited about the possibility of education, applied to UC Berkeley, did not make it in. Went for another year of college, the pandemic hit, dropped out of school. He's cutting hair, still going to community college. Same question. What are we doing that allows this young man to find his way into really a thriving community? What is it that the church is doing, that our educational institutions are doing to create access, to really set a table, to really transform the world? Because the church, God has always been to. I mean, one of the things I'm grateful for, communion is one of them. If I screw up, there's always communion. Jesus will be there. But there's also the conviction that God has always prepared leaders for the church. God will continue to do that. Whether seminaries run through financial crisis, whether churches can't figure out, God has always done this. What we got to figure out is, what is God up to so we can get behind it and paying attention to where God is thriving and active in the midst of these things, and then to ask the questions, how can we get behind those things? Not always assume, particularly for an educational institution, that we know what it is that it will take.
Yeah. All right, with the time that we have left, I want to see if there are any questions out there. If you're not comfortable, because we have a good-sized group, we're happy to take live questions. But if you're not comfortable saying it out loud, you can also just lift up your card and someone will grab it. And trust that we've got questions in queue, but would love to hear from any of you all if you have something burning within you. Yeah,
Here?
Randy.
So Amos, is this weirdness the same as the foolishness that's talked about? The foolishness of God being stronger and better than the wisdom of the world? Or is it something different?
Okay, I'm going to repeat. Can you repeat the question for the live stream?
I think, what I heard was, is the weirdness that I was mentioning earlier the same as foolishness? This foolishness is expressed in the Bible. Yes, you're right. It is, yeah. And to expand on what I said earlier, the challenge for us, I think, I can speak for my context. The challenge for the local church that I'm a part of is to continue to believe in the weirdness of a future in which people actually change their minds or are transformed by the proclamation of the word and the gospel of Jesus Christ. I think we have become very skilled at challenging people to participate in societal change. And I'm also grateful. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful also for the progress we've made in my local, the church that I serve, in making church more accessible and being more open and even more affirming of more people. And that was the first step, right? But now it's, do we actually believe that God is still, like, the gospel is still transforming people's lives when people participate in this weird thing that we call church? Is there any change happening? Are they growing to be more compassionate or kind, sacrificial?
Yes.
Are they growing in their propensity to act as a servant in this world? Are they giving up their spot in line? Are they willing to die for someone else?
Yes. Thank you.
So. Other questions? Thanks. That was a great question. Doug.
Berkeley, can you talk about the future of church-based ministry, campus ministry? Let me say that again.
Oh, gosh.
The future of church-based
campus ministry. What is the future of church-based campus ministry?
Woo-hoo.
Why are we wooing? Let's just put that on the table.
It's just a lot to unpack, right? Like, our church was founded to support UC Berkeley faculty, staff, students. We have an endowed fund that allows us to, that covers most of the salary for someone dedicated to campus ministry. We've expanded that scope in the last few years, 6-7 years, to include just young adults in general. The person who just moved out of that role was really successful at first. She's an incredible, super smart, capable, charismatic, funny, sweet, dear Kit Novotny. There was this boom, and then, it just sort of dissipated. It didn't blow up, it just sort of dissipated. I think more evangelical churches still have a lot of success. I think primarily because they're so structured and disciplined about it, and college students are very vulnerable. So they're looking for that, again, that strong container. Some of them are deconstructing. You hear a lot about that. Deconstructing faith, ex-evangelical movement. So I don't know. I think it's different things for different college students at different times. We went on campus 2 weeks ago. This is the most fun I've had doing ministry in a long time. A whole bunch of people at our church baked cookies. They probably baked 500, 600 cookies. And a few of us wheeled them over in wagons for finals week. and just gave out free cookies. We said blessings and cookies. No one asked for a blessing, but I said the blessings are baked into the cookies. I wore my clergy collar, so did my colleague. We had a couple, great church members there as well. We had one of them brought her dog, so it ended up being like a little on-the-spot therapy dog. And the students were so grateful and so receptive. I thought maybe we would be too weird for them, like here, people in clergy collars. This is not the most receptive environment for mainline Christianity. Like moved here from Boston, and I thought Boston was a little frosty, and that was a hard place to grow a church, but East Bay is way tougher sell around here. But they were so grateful. They said, it's so nice of you to think of us. We asked them how their finals were going. Like they needed us to show up for them. They didn't know they did, but when we did, they were so grateful and receptive. We ran out of cookies in about 75 minutes and made some sweet friends. And some of them took our pictures and posted on Instagram. Others took our little cards. Maybe they'll come to church, maybe not. That's not the point. The point is we're not trying to make new members. We're trying to be a blessing to young people in their time of need. So we're just going to continue to look for ways to do that.
So I said woof, but I shouldn't have. And thank you, your answer is inspiring. Because we've been asking here as well, our university students. I think what the future of church-based university ministry, college ministry, young adult ministry is, I'm going to say the word home. And deeply tied to that is the concept of belonging. And I actually think that's the same answer for all of us, right?
Yes.
But for college and university students who are away from home, I was involved in a very evangelical campus group in college, and what the salvation for me was not necessarily the theology that I was being taught, was that it was home, it was belonging. And so what we're hearing from these students is actually they just want a place where someone's caring for them and they're being held in the way they might be held in what would be seen as a healthy home. But even deeper than that, homes are in what? Neighborhoods. And so what we're seeing with this generation is that they want awareness of their proximity or their neighborhood. And so what we're seeing is that our university students want to be in deep community with one another, and they want to get to know the community around them, which includes the people in the church, but also those who are in need around them. And so if you can just, even for a time, and this is the hard thing for churches because it is for only a few years at a time. And so the investment leaves constantly. But if we're okay with that, which we should be, it is how do we create this concept of home for a population of people who are being, by their own will, yes, but displaced. So they're being displaced intellectually, theologically, geographically, all of these things. That was when I questioned everything I ever believed about God, was in college. And home is not a place necessarily. The reason that the home for me in college religiously broke down was because they kicked me out when I started questioning those things. And that's not the kind of home that anyone wants, right? Is just to be kicked out when you don't agree with everything that's being said. And so I think that actually college students, university students, youth, young adults, these generations are actually transforming and reforming us by rejecting a lot of things that have worked, but they're like, actually, it's simpler. So can you just cut all the complicated stuff out? Yeah.
Well, and I think, the last couple of years we've spent time trying to figure out what is essential, right? And so the fact that people are asking serious questions, your young ones are asking about death. I think a lot of young people, college students, are thinking about death. They're thinking significantly about life with purpose, quitting in droves because people want to have meaningful work in life. And so the opportunity is beginning to be there for that. The question is, will we be seen as a community that has a desire to sit with those questions, to wrestle with those things? Many of us are anxious about the midterm elections. Sometimes, when you think about what may happen around the elections, particularly for progressive causes, is that the focus of all funding is on the undecided voter. Read suburban white people who, for some reason, have not yet made their decision. The reality is that if we invest some of those resources politically into the people who actually are not in that place, but that actually focus our attention, some recent polling on Latino voters in California is really revealing the reality that while Latinos, vote Democrat in large numbers, there is a frustration about not feeling addressed by the party. So I'm using that example to say, who are we addressing? When we think about our church-based commitments to higher education institutions, part of it is who do we have in mind? Who are we trying to reach? Around whom are we designing or thinking, and are we engaging some of those individuals to understand what it is that they're asking questions about, what is essential, and not make assumptions about who they are. Large numbers of young Latino people, for example, but I think it's similar to other communities of color, do have an understanding of faith that is very different than the ones that our churches that are predominantly white may have had. They have a very different sense of the role of the church in their community and in their lives. So I do agree that belonging, questioning, those things are important, but then just to be clear about who are we trying to address, who are we trying to recruit, so you have a sense of connection to, and what they may be wrestling with, thinking about, and how might we engage them meaningfully around those things that they want to do, and certainly around commitments to transformative ways of being in the world, to be the place where people gather to learn songs. Last random thing to say about this is, I was listening to the radio earlier today, and so The Simpsons' 33rd season starts tomorrow. And one of the things they're focusing on that the creators did is they realized that for 33 years, Homer Simpson has on one income, without a college education, been able to have a middle class life.
Yeah.
And so in this last season, they're trying to figure out, is that still real? Can Homer Simpson still today, 33 years later, have a middle class life on that income? Now, what they're doing is they have the power of story, right? That's what they will do in responding to that question. And we have the power of whatever the story is, the weirdness. What is the story we need to be able to tell about what's happening in the world? What is the reality of this nation's story? What is the story of the arc of the universe? Does it really bend towards justice? So if we can spend time on those core stories, not just to tell them, but to understand them, of what are the stories, the way that people are making sense of the world, because around that is the same story we want to kind of wrestle with.
All right, friends, I recognize that this is probably the longest you've sat down in front of a non-screen in the past 3 years. And so I want to honor the time commitment that we said, but we will stick around and stay up here to answer any questions that you might have. So my final question to my panelists is a one-word answer question. I know you hate those kind of assignments.
No.
What is one thing the church or your faith tradition has given you that you want to give back to your church or your faith tradition? And I hope you all are thinking of your answer to that question as well. Molly?
It's basic, but love.
Courage.
Compassion.
Justice.
Love, compassion, courage, and justice. I think that's a pretty good place for us to start with the future of faith. So friends, thank you so much for being with us for this live conversation. You bless us with your presence and your time. Thank you for those who have brought your children and your youth to participate in this weekend as well. For all of you are invited, but for First Pres Berkeley folks, we are excited to have Amos in the pulpit tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And so we invite you to join us for that weird, crazy, just foolish thing called worship. There will be amazing music and singing and liturgy and a New Orleans brass band that will be playing us out into the plaza. So we hope to see you all tomorrow. Friends, thank you so much for being with us.